Have you ever been forgotten by the people you love most? Have you ever prepared something special with all your heart, only to discover that nobody cared enough to show up? This is the true story of Helen, a 72-year-old woman who spent the entire day preparing the perfect Christmas for her children. Table set, turkey roasted, gifts wrapped with care. But when night came, she was alone, completely alone. Her 3 children simply didn't show up, each with a cold and distant excuse. This emotional story is about abandonment, pain, but also about an unexpected discovery that changed everything. Because sometimes, when the people who should love us let us down, the universe puts exactly who we need to meet right in our path. What did Helen do after that devastating Christmas? How did she deal with family betrayal? And what was the surprise that fate prepared for her? To understand all of this, I need to tell you how it all began on that Christmas night that should have been special, but turned into the loneliest of her life. You know that moment when you put your whole heart into something, prepare everything with so much love, and suddenly realize nobody cares? That's exactly how I felt that Christmas. My name is Helen Parker. I'm 72 years old, and I spent the entire day in the kitchen preparing a feast that would be perfect. The turkey was golden the way my children always loved. The apple pie, still warm, filled the whole house with fragrance. And the table. Oh, the table was beautiful, decorated with those red tablecloths I saved for special occasions. Every detail thought through with care. Every dish chosen with memories of past Christmases, when the house felt small from so many people, so much noise, so much life. I arranged the gifts under the tree with that care of someone who knows each child deeply. For Robert, the oldest, a watch he'd mentioned months ago. Yes, mothers pay attention to these things. For Sarah, my middle child, a wool shawl I made myself, stitch by stitch, thinking about how she always complains about the cold. And for Tom, the youngest, that rare book he'd been looking for forever, and that took me weeks to find in an old bookstore downtown. They were more than gifts. They were pieces of my heart wrapped in colorful paper, waiting to be opened with smiles and tight hugs. I looked at the clock for the 10th time in half an hour. 6 in the evening. They'd said they'd arrive at 5, but that's okay. Christmas traffic is always complicated, I understood. I lit the candles on the table, adjusted the centerpiece flowers for the 3rd time, checked if the turkey was still warm. My cell phone was right there, right beside me on the living room table, and I looked at it every minute that passed, hoping to see those messages that say, "We're almost there, Mom," or 10 minutes and we'll be there. But the screen remained dark, silent, indifferent to the anxiety growing in my chest with each passing second. 7 at night. The turkey was starting to get cold. The candles had already burned down almost halfway, and the house that should have been full of laughter and conversations was heavy with a suffocating silence. That's when the phone finally vibrated, and my heart gave that jump of hope. But when I opened the messages, I felt something crumble inside me. Robert, sorry Mom, can't make it this year. The in-laws insisted we spend Christmas there. Sarah, Mom, something came up last minute, we can't come. Merry Christmas. Tom, really sorry Mom, but we decided to travel. We'll see you next year. Short messages, cold, as if they were canceling some random appointment, not Christmas with their own mother. I stood there, holding the phone with trembling hands, rereading those words as if hoping they'd change meaning. Can't make it? Something came up? Decided to travel? What do you mean? They'd known for months I was preparing this Christmas, knew how important it was for me to have everyone together after such a difficult year. I looked at the table arranged with so much care, at the gifts waiting under the tree, at the turkey nobody was going to eat, and felt the tears start to fall. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were of total humiliation, of feeling like I wasn't worth even one day of their time. I sat at the head of the empty table, that chair from where I always coordinated the feasts, distributed the dishes, listened to stories, laughed at jokes. Now it was just me and the silence. The tree lights blinked cheerfully, completely oblivious to the pain I felt. Outside, I could hear neighbors laughing, children playing, families gathered celebrating together. And me? I was there, alone, looking at a table full of food nobody was going to share with me. surrounded by gifts nobody was going to open, living a Christmas that should have been about togetherness, but became the most painful symbol of my loneliness. I grabbed a napkin and wiped the tears, trying to pull myself together, but it was useless. How did we get to this point? When did I stop being important enough to deserve one day, just one day of their attention? I who spent so many Christmases giving up everything to make sure they had the best holidays, the best gifts, the best memories. And now, when it was my turn to receive a little of that love back, they simply didn't show up. Not even a video call, not even a decent explanation, just cold messages that looked more like automatic excuses you send when you want to get rid of something inconvenient. I blew out the candles one by one, watching the smoke rise and disappear in the air, as if it took with it the last hopes I had that this Christmas would be different. The house, which for a few hours had smelled of celebration, family, love, now just smelled of cooling food and lost opportunity. I covered the turkey with aluminum foil, put the desserts in the fridge, and each movement was like accepting a painful truth. My children forgot about me. Or worse, they remembered me and chose not to come anyway. And I don't know what hurt more, being forgotten or being consciously left aside. But something told me that this empty Christmas night was about to change everything in my life in a way I could never imagine. I sat there in that silent room, looking at the Christmas tree blinking its colorful little lights, and it was impossible not to let memories invade my mind. I remembered the first Christmas after John died, when the kids were still little and I had to pretend everything was okay, even with a broken heart. Robert was 8 years old, Sarah 6, and little Tom only 4. They didn't fully understand why Daddy wasn't there to help set up the tree, to put the star on top, to read that Christmas story they always read together. It was up to me to be both mother and father at the same time, dry my own tears hidden in the bathroom and then come back with a smile and make gingerbread cookies as if nothing had changed. In those early years, every Christmas was a battle against sadness and lack of money. I worked 2 jobs, during the day at the school as a secretary, at the night cleaning offices, to make sure the kids had at least a few gifts under the tree. I remember one specific year when Sarah asked for a doll that sang and cost a fortune. I worked overtime for 2 months, skipped lunches, saved every penny, and when I saw her little face light up on Christmas morning, holding that doll like it was the greatest treasure in the world, I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. Back then, I was everything to them. I was the safe harbor, the person who made magic happen even when there was no magic available. The house was much smaller back then, and the tree was artificial, a bit crooked, with half the lights burned out. But when I look back, those were the most beautiful Christmases, you know? We didn't have much, but we had each other. Robert helped decorate while telling me about school. Sarah sang off-key Christmas songs, but with so much enthusiasm, it was impossible not to smile. And Tom, oh, Tom stayed glued to my legs, following me around the house like a loyal puppy. "Mommy, you're the best mom in the world," he'd say, with that tiny child's voice, and I believed I'd always be important to them, that this love was forever. As they grew up, Christmases changed, but for a long time, they were still special. Adolescence brought its rebellions, of course, but at Christmas, they went back to being my babies, even if they wouldn't admit it. Robert brought different girlfriends each year. I learned not to get too attached. Sarah started helping in the kitchen, and we'd spend hours preparing the feast together, talking about life, about dreams, about boys. Tom continued being my favorite, the youngest who always gave me the best hugs. Even when life got busy, even when bills got tight, Christmas was sacred. It was the day when nothing else mattered except being together, remembering we were a family, that we survived the loss and stayed united. But then they really grew up, got married, had their own children, their own lives, and little by little, subtly, I started to stop being a priority. At first it was small changes. They'd arrive a bit later, leave a bit earlier. Then the excuses started. "Mom, this year we're going to spend half the day with you and half with the in-laws, okay?" And I accepted because it's fair, right? They have other families now, other obligations. But each year that passed, my portion kept shrinking. Half a day became a few hours. A few hours became a quick visit. And now not even that. Now I'm the option that gets postponed, the commitment that can be cancelled without weighing on their conscience. I looked at the gifts under the tree and thought about how many sacrifices I made for them. When Robert wanted to go to college in an expensive city, I took on a third job to help with costs. When Sarah got divorced and needed a place to stay with the kids, I opened my home without thinking twice, took care of the grandkids while she rebuilt her life. When Tom lost his job and was desperate, it was my retirement money that helped him get by until he found something new. I always put them first. And at the moment in my life when I needed them most, when loneliness weighed so heavily it felt like it was going to suffocate me, they simply weren't here. The painful truth is that I became invisible to them. Not on purpose, maybe. They're not bad people, they're not consciously cruel. But they're so involved in their own lives, so busy with their problems, their families, their commitments, that they forgot the mother who was always there also needs someone. I became that call they answer in a hurry, that visit they make out of obligation, that love given in drops, because there's not much left after distributing it to everyone. And maybe the saddest part is realizing that somehow I taught them this. I taught them that Mom always endures, always understands, always forgives. I taught them I'd be here always, so they didn't need to make an effort to keep me close. I wiped another tear that insisted on falling and looked at that empty table, at that food nobody was going to eat, at those gifts nobody was going to open. John, if he were alive, would be furious with the kids. He was always tougher, more demanding of them regarding values, respect, family. I was the soft mom, the one who always overlooked, always justified. They're still kids, John, I'd say. They'll learn with time. But did they learn? Or did I spoil them so much, protect them so much, that they never developed the ability to look beyond their own needs? These questions hurt more than the loneliness, because they made me question if somehow I was to blame for this abandonment. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to swallow me completely. The house was silent, just the tick-tock of the clock on the wall marking the seconds of a Christmas that had turned into the loneliest day of the year. I thought about calling them, about begging them to reconsider, to come even if just for an hour. But my pride, that stubborn thing that lives inside me and rarely appears, said no. If they didn't want to be here of their own free will, out of love, out of gratitude, then I wasn't going to beg for their presence. And it was in that moment between sadness and indignation that I heard something that would change everything. The doorbell ringing, piercing the silence like an unexpected ray of light in the deepest darkness. While I was there, drowning in my sadness, looking at that empty table and wondering where I went wrong as a mother, my children were living a completely different reality. And the worst part? I had no idea how different it was. Robert was in a fancy restaurant downtown, that kind of place with candles on the table and a menu you need to translate. He, his wife Jennifer, and their 2 kids were celebrating Christmas as if it were just another dinner, without any weight on their conscience. "Dad, why isn't Grandma here?" little Jake asked, and Robert just shrugged, cutting his filet mignon as if the question didn't deserve much attention. Jennifer, that daughter-in-law who always had a cold way with me, smiled satisfied and said something that, if I'd known at that moment, would have broken my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Jake, sweetheart, Grandma's fine. She understands we need to spend Christmas with important people too." Important people too? As if I weren't important. As if the kid's grandmother, the woman who helped pay for her husband's college, were just a footnote in their lives. Robert didn't correct her, didn't defend me. He just agreed with a nod and continued talking about the next trip they were planning for vacation, as if none of that was a public scandal of ingratitude. Sarah was in a similar situation, only worse. She was at her in-laws' house, at a huge party with her husband Mark's entire family. The house was packed, loud music, plenty of food, laughter echoing through the rooms. Sarah was posting photos on Instagram, smiling with champagne glasses, hugging people she barely knew. And me, not even a mention. Not I'm missing my mom this Christmas, or next year we'll be together. Nothing. As if I simply didn't exist. As if her Christmas had no connection to the woman who spent 35 years of her life making sure she had the best Christmases possible. It was during dinner that the real stab came. Sarah's sister-in-law Amanda commented casually, "Sarah, wasn't your mom upset you didn't go this year?" And you know what my daughter answered? With that dismissive tone of someone talking about something unimportant. "Oh, Mom will understand. She's already old, doesn't need that much celebration. It's better for her to stay quietly at home, resting, old, quietly." As if I were an antique piece of furniture that needs to be stored in a corner, protected from real life. Mark laughed and added, "Yeah, and honestly, it's always the same thing at her house. Turkey, pie, those repeated stories. Here we have more options, you know?" Family betrayal hurt more when it came disguised as practicality. Tom, my youngest, the boy who was always my favorite, was at a luxury resort with his new wife, Jessica, that woman who appeared in his life 2 years ago and always had a strange way of looking at me, as if I were a threat, an intruder in their marriage. They were by the pool, drinks in hand, enjoying the sun while I froze with loneliness in my empty house. "Do you think your mom was upset?" Jessica asked, but her tone made it clear she didn't really care. Tom gave that awkward smile and answered, "She'll get over it. My mom's strong, always has been. And let's face it, we deserve a vacation, right?" What none of them understood, or simply didn't want to understand, is that strength isn't synonymous with not needing anyone. I was strong because I had to be, because there was no other option when John died and left me alone with 3 kids to raise. But that strength had a price, and the price was emotional exhaustion, accumulated loneliness, need for affection, that I always swept under the rug because Mom has to be strong. And now they used my strength as an excuse not to care, as if I were a superhero incapable of feeling pain, incapable of needing someone. At their lavish tables, in their luxurious celebrations, at their expensive resorts, my 3 children did exactly the same thing, chose their own conveniences over me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a conscious choice, calculated, justified with shallow excuses. They believed themselves because it was easier that way. It's easier to say, "She's strong, she can handle it," than to admit I'm being selfish. It's more comfortable to think she's already old anyway than to recognize I'm abandoning my mother on the most important day of the year. The emotional story they'd tell later would be totally different from the cold truths of the facts. And the most ironic part? While they justified their absences with empty excuses, while they convinced themselves they were good people, just making practical choices, I was there, alone, crying over a table set with love, surrounded by gifts that would never be opened. The difference between the 2 realities was brutal. They laughed, celebrated, enjoyed life. I suffocated in loneliness, questioning my value, wondering if all those years of dedication meant anything. And the answer seemed to be a painful no that echoed through every empty room of my house. But what they didn't know, what none of them could imagine in that moment of selfish celebrations, is that empty Christmas would be the turning point. That while they toasted with expensive champagne and justified their absences with mediocre excuses, something was about to happen in my life that would change everything. Sometimes life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you need when you least expect it. And at the exact moment when I thought loneliness would swallow me completely, fate rang my doorbell. Literally, when I heard the doorbell ring, my first thought was, one of them changed their mind. My heart gave that pathetic jump of hope, and I got up too quickly, almost tripping in my own hurry. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand, tried to fix my hair, took a deep breath. Maybe it was Robert coming to apologize, or Sarah, who was always more sensitive and maybe had regretted it, or even Tom, my baby, coming back to make peace with his mother. I walked to the door with my heart pounding in my chest, mentally preparing the words I'd say, deciding whether to make a scene or pretend everything was fine. But when I opened the door, it wasn't any of my children. It was Michael. Michael Carter, my widowed neighbor who's 75 years old, was standing there in the doorway with a gentle smile and holding a tray covered with a checkered dish towel. We always exchanged greetings when we ran into each other in the yard. Him taking care of his roses, me watering my hydrangeas. Short conversations about the weather, about the noisy neighbors on the corner, about how the neighborhood had changed over the years. Nothing deep, just that polite cordiality of people who share the same street. But never in all the years he lived next door had Michael shown up at my door on Christmas night. "Helen," he said, and his voice had that softness of someone who chooses words carefully. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I noticed your house was quiet." I stood there, not quite knowing what to say. Noticed my house was quiet? What did that mean? Did he realize nobody had come? Did he hear my sobs through the walls? The total humiliation of being seen in my misery by a neighbor started rising up my throat, hot and uncomfortable. "Oh, Michael, I'm fine. It's just—" I started to lie, already preparing that excuse that would make it seem like I'd chosen to spend Christmas alone, that it was my decision, that I was perfectly happy this way. But he gently raised his hand, interrupting me before I could finish the lie. "Helen, I didn't think it was fair for you to spend Christmas alone. Nobody should be alone today." He extended the tray to me, and when he removed the cloth, it revealed a pile of homemade cookies, still warm, with the smell of cinnamon and ginger that filled my nose and, inexplicably, made my eyes fill with tears again. "My mother used to make these at Christmas," Michael explained, with that somewhat awkward way of someone who's not sure if they're doing the right thing. "They didn't turn out as good as hers, but I thought you might like to have company. If you want company, of course. If you'd rather be alone, I completely understand." His voice had such genuine kindness, so different from the cold messages and shallow excuses from my children, that I felt something break inside me. "You made this for me?" I asked, and my voice came out so small, so vulnerable, that I almost didn't recognize it as mine. Michael smiled, that shy smile of an elderly man who'd lost his wife 5 years ago, and who I knew, from previous conversations, also spent Christmases alone. "Actually, Helen, I'll be honest with you. My kids are in California, couldn't make it this year, and I was there in my empty living room when I saw your house all lit up earlier. I saw you setting the table through the window, saw you'd prepared a beautiful celebration, and then I saw the lights going out, the house getting dark, and I realized you were alone too. I thought maybe we could be lonely together, you know? It's less sad that way." I stood there looking at this man I barely knew, at those cookies made with care, at that simple gesture that meant so much. A stranger, practically, had noticed my pain and decided to do something about it. While my own children were in expensive restaurants and luxury resorts, pretending I didn't exist, a neighbor who owed me nothing showed up with homemade cookies because he didn't think it was fair for me to be alone. The irony was so brutal it was almost funny. Almost. "Michael, I started, but the words got lost somewhere between my throat and my lips. He understood anyway, as lonely people sometimes understand each other without needing words. "Look, Helen, I know we don't know each other very well, but—" He hesitated as if about to make an absurd request. "My kids and grandkids are at my house. They came to visit me by surprise this afternoon, and they're there now making an improvised feast. It's nothing elaborate like what you prepared, I'm sure, but there's food, laughter, kids running around, and I thought you might join us. I know it seems strange going to the house of people you barely know on Christmas, but—" He looked me in the eyes, and there was so much sincerity there it was impossible not to be moved. "But nobody should spend this night alone, Helen, and I'd be honored if you'd accept." My first reaction was to say no, of course. My pride screamed that I didn't need anyone's charity, that it'd be embarrassing to show up at strangers' house on Christmas, that I should stay in my house and keep my dignity. But then I looked back at that empty room, at that table nobody was going to share with me, at those gifts that would never be opened. I looked at all that loneliness materialized in the form of a wasted feast and thought, why not? Why the hell not? My children left me here alone, chose other people, other places, other priorities, and here was someone offering kindness without expecting anything in return, offering company on the loneliest day of my life. Was the universe trying to tell me something? I'd love to, Michael. I answered, and for the first time that horrible day, a genuine smile appeared on my face. Let me just grab my coat and lock up the house. As I closed the door behind me, carrying one of the desserts I'd prepared to take as a contribution, I felt something strange, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, as if I were about to embark on an unexpected adventure. I had no idea that impulsive decision, that yes said more out of desperation than desire, would completely change my perspective on family, on love, and on what really matters in life. Sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely situations. When I entered Michael's house, I was greeted by an explosion of warmth, light, and noise, the good kind of noise, that happy chaos of family gathered that I'd imagined for my own house a few hours ago. 2 children came running down the hallway, laughing while one chased the other, almost knocking me over in the process. "Sorry!" the older girl shouted without stopping. Michael laughed in that embarrassed grandfather way and guided me to the living room. "That's Emma, 8 years old, and the hurricane that almost ran you over is Lucas, 6 years old. My grandkids, they have enough energy to light up the entire city." And there, in that simple comment, I felt a pang of envy mixed with longing. When was the last time my grandkids visited me like that, full of life and joy? Michael's family was scattered throughout the living room and kitchen. His son David was adjusting something on the TV, trying to connect a video game for the boys. His daughter-in-law, Rachel, was in the kitchen finishing some dishes, and she greeted me with such a genuine smile that it caught me by surprise. "You must be Helen. Dad talked so much about you. How lucky to have you here with us." Talked so much about me. We barely knew each other, but the way she hugged me, made me sit at the kitchen table and immediately offered me a glass of wine, made me feel welcome. Not tolerated, not accepted out of obligation, but genuinely welcome. When was the last time I felt like this in my own children's homes? The feast at Michael's house was completely different from what I'd prepared. It didn't have that perfect organization, that elaborate decoration. It was messy, improvised, with mixed dishes and people eating, standing up because they didn't all fit at the table. But you know what? It was perfect precisely because of that. There was life there, true connection, people who really wanted to be together. David told a hilarious story about how he almost burned down the kitchen trying to make the turkey. Rachel interrupted to correct the details. Michael laughed so hard he needed to wipe his eyes, and the kids asked him to tell the story again, even though they'd heard it 1,000 times. It was chaotic, it was loud, it was absolutely beautiful. At some point in the evening, Emma came up to me with that unfiltered curiosity only children have. "Are you Grandma Helen?" she asked, climbing into my lap without asking permission. As if she'd known me for years, my heart tightened. "No, sweetheart, I'm just a friend of your grandpa's." She thought for a second, and then declared with that childish certainty, "Then you can be my extra grandma. Everybody needs extra grandmas." And you know what moved me most? It was Rachel immediately agreeing. "Of course you can. The more love, the better." That was so simple, so natural for them, and so different from the cold complexity of relationships with my own children, that I needed to excuse myself to go to the bathroom because the tears started falling again. After dinner, Michael put on old Christmas songs, those that played when I was young and the world seemed simpler. And before I could process what was happening, Emma pulled me by the hand. "Grandma Helen, dance with me." I tried to refuse, say I was too old, that my legs weren't what they used to be, but she insisted with that adorable stubbornness of a child. And then I was there, dancing in the living room of people I barely knew, with an 8-year-old girl stepping on my feet and laughing, and David filming everything on his phone while shouting, "Go, Helen!" and Rachel clapping, and Michael smiling in that way lonely people smile when they finally find a moment of genuine joy. For the first time in a long time, I laughed, really laughed, that laugh that comes from your belly, that makes your eyes water with joy instead of sadness. I spun with Emma until I got dizzy, stopped to breathe, and was immediately captured by Lucas, who wanted his turn to dance. "Did you know Santa has flying reindeer?" he told me seriously, as if sharing the universe's greatest secret. "I did know," I answered, playing along. "And did you know the fastest one is called Rudolph?" His eyes widened. How do you know? And there we were, me and this little boy I'd met an hour ago, talking about Santa like we were old friends. Meanwhile, my own grandkids probably didn't even remember me today. Later, when the kids finally started getting tired, everyone settled in the living room to watch a Christmas movie. Emma and Lucas snuggled on either side of Michael on the couch, and I stayed in an armchair nearby. But Emma, that blessed child the universe put in my path, wasn't satisfied with that. "Grandma Helen, come here in the middle with us." And before I could protest, she and Lucas had already made room, pulled me to the couch, and settled down, one on each side, with their little heads resting on my shoulders. The weight of those children against me, their innocent trust, the way they accepted me so easily, it was too much. I felt the tears silently streaming down while I pretended to watch the movie, but it was gratitude, not sadness. David noticed my tears and leaned forward. "Helen, are you okay?" he asked with genuine concern. I nodded yes, unable to speak without sobbing. Rachel understood without needing explanations. She got up, brought me a tissue, and squeezed my hand. "We were also thinking about spending this Christmas alone," she whispered. "We were going to stay home, just the four of us. But Dad insisted we come, said he wanted to be with the grandkids, and now you're here, and everything became even more special. Thank you for coming, Helen. Thank you for being part of our night." She was thanking me, when I should be on my knees, thanking them for not having spent this night alone in the dark. When the movie ended and the kids finally fell asleep, Lucas completely passed out in Michael's lap, Emma still fighting sleep on my shoulder. I looked around that messy room full of dirty dishes, scattered gift wrappings, crooked decorations, and thought, this is Christmas. It's not about perfection. It's not about impeccably set tables or expensive gifts. It's about being with people who care, about true connections, about sharing moments that stay in your memory for the rest of your life. My children had given me perfect tables in expensive restaurants and luxurious vacations, but denied me the only thing I really wanted, presents. And these strangers, these people I barely knew, gave me exactly what my own family wouldn't give. But what I still didn't know is that this magical night was just the beginning of a much bigger change in my life. I woke up the next day with that strange feeling of having slept well for the first time in weeks. The sun came through my bedroom window, and for a few blessed seconds, I just felt the peace of morning. But then reality came back. It was the day after Christmas, and my children hadn't come. The difference is that today, after the incredible night at Michael's house, the pain was a bit softer, covered by a thin layer of gratitude. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand to check the time, and that's when I saw 15 unread messages. My heart gave that idiotic jump of hope again. Would they be apologies? Late regrets? I opened the phone with slightly trembling hands. The first message was from Robert, sent at 11 at night. "Mom, I tried calling you and you didn't answer. Where are you?" I frowned. He tried to call me. After leaving me alone all night, now he was worried. The second message came at 11:30. "Mom, is everything okay? I'm getting worried. Call me when you see this." Worried? Now? I scrolled down and saw similar messages from Sarah. "Mom, you're not responding. This isn't normal. Call us." And from Tom. "Mom, where are you? I'm calling and you're not answering. Please respond." Each message increased in tone of urgency, but none, absolutely none, mentioned an apology or acknowledgement of what they'd done. It was Sarah's message from 8 in the morning that really left me speechless. "Mom, where the hell did you spend the night? I saw through the location app that you weren't home. You owe us an explanation. We were worried all night." Wait, what? They were worried. They, who abandoned me on Christmas without even blinking, were now demanding answers because I didn't spend the night alone crying in my empty house. The audacity was so absurd I had to read it again to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. And there was more. A 2-minute voice message from Robert complaining that I'd disappeared and that this was irresponsible of me. I sat on the bed, still processing that. Irresponsible of me? Me, who spent 50 years of my life being the most responsible person in the world, always available, always present, always prioritizing them above everything. And now, because I spent one night, doing something for myself, because I accepted a kind neighbor's invitation instead of withering away alone, I was being irresponsible. The anger started boiling inside me, hot and justified. It wasn't explosive anger, it was something worse. It was the cold anger of someone finally seeing the truth with crystal clarity. They weren't worried about me. They were bothered because I went off script. There were more messages in the family group they created without consulting me. Sarah wrote, "Guys, Mom spent the night out. Could she be having some memory problems? Elderly people sometimes get confused." Tom responded, "I don't know, but she should have at least let us know. We have a right to know where she is, right? They had a right to know where I was. But I didn't have a right to spend Christmas with my children. I didn't have a right to at least a decent explanation." The hypocrisy was suffocating me, and I hadn't even had coffee yet. Robert completed the trio of absurdities. "I'll stop by this afternoon to check if everything's okay. She can't be doing these things. We worry." Oh, now they worried. How convenient. I got up, went to the kitchen, and put water on to boil. I needed strong coffee to process that family betrayal disguised as concern. While waiting for the water to boil, I reread the messages several times, trying to find one that said, "Sorry for leaving you alone on Christmas," or "It was wrong of us," or at least, "We hope you were okay." But there wasn't one. Zero. Nothing. All the messages were about them, about how they got worried, about how I should have told them, about how my behavior was strange. It was as if yesterday's abandonment simply hadn't happened, as if it had been erased from history and replaced by my crime of not being available when they finally decided to remember me. What hurt most wasn't even the lack of apology. It was the complete lack of self-awareness. They genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what they'd done. In their heads, it was perfectly acceptable to cancel on me on Christmas with cold last-minute messages. But it was a scandal for me to spend the night at the neighbor's house. It was okay for them to prioritize in-laws, trips, and their own comfort. But it was inadmissible for me to prioritize my own mental sanity by accepting a kind invitation. The rules were completely different for them and for me, and the worst part is they didn't even notice. Or they noticed and didn't care. I didn't know which was worse. I drank my coffee looking through the kitchen window, seeing Michael in his yard watering plants like he always did in the morning. He saw me and waved with that gentle smile, and I waved back, feeling immense gratitude for that man who, without really knowing me, saved me from the worst night of my life. That's when my phone rang. It was Sarah video call. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hi, Mom. Thank God you're okay. We were so worried." She spoke too fast, with that high-pitched voice of someone who's nervous. But her eyes didn't show genuine concern. They showed poorly disguised irritation. "Where were you last night? Why didn't you answer our calls?" "I was at the neighbor's house," I answered calmly, taking another sip of coffee. "He invited me to have dinner with his family." Sarah's face changed immediately. "What do you mean at the neighbor's house? What neighbor? Why did you go to stranger's house on Christmas? Mom, this isn't normal. We should have been notified." And there it was. Confirmation of what I already suspected. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were bothered because I'd found joy elsewhere, because I hadn't stayed waiting for them like an abandoned dog waiting for its owner to return. They wanted me to stay in my little box, available when convenient for them, but quiet and invisible when it wasn't. "Sarah," I said, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. "You left me alone on Christmas. You, your brother, and Tom. All three of you chose other things, other people, other priorities, and when someone was kind enough to offer me company, I accepted. I don't owe you an explanation about this." I saw her face turn red, her mouth opening and closing as if looking for words. "Mom, it's not like that. We had our reasons. You're exaggerating." But I'd already hung up. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my daughter. And you know what I felt? Not guilt, not regret. I felt power. I felt like I'd just recovered a piece of my dignity I didn't even know I'd lost. And that was just the beginning. After hanging up on Sarah, I sat there in the kitchen, looking at the phone as if it were going to explode any moment. My heart was racing, my hands trembling slightly, but it wasn't from fear. It was pure adrenaline. I had hung up. I, Helen Parker, the mother who always swallowed insults, who always overlooked things, who always put her children's feelings above her own, had hung up on her own daughter. And the craziest part? I wasn't feeling guilty. I was feeling free, as if I'd broken an invisible chain that had been binding me for decades. It was in that moment, drinking the rest of my already cold coffee, that I made a decision. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of their ingratitude anymore. I got up from the table with a determination I hadn't felt in years and went straight to the guest room, where I'd stored the Christmas gifts. There they were, all wrapped with so much care, each chosen thinking about my children's tastes and needs. Robert's watch, Sarah's shawl, Tom's rare book. I picked up each package, felt their weight in my hands, and realized something. These gifts represented much more than objects. They represented years and years of me trying to buy their love, trying to make myself relevant through material gestures, because emotional gestures were no longer reciprocated. And I was tired of it. Tired of begging for attention, of pleading for presence, of trying to be important in the lives of people who clearly didn't value me. I grabbed my phone and searched Google for charities in the area. I found a shelter for needy families about 20 minutes from home and called there. Hello, good morning. My name is Helen Parker, and I'd like to donate some Christmas gifts. Do you still accept donations? The woman on the other end of the line was so happy I could almost feel her smile through the phone. Of course, ma'am. We have several families here who couldn't give gifts to their kids this year. Anything helps a lot. I arranged to bring the gifts that same afternoon. And you know what I felt when I hung up? Not sadness about giving up my children's gifts. I felt satisfaction knowing those things would go to people who really needed them, who would really appreciate them. But it wasn't just about the gifts. While looking at the guest room, that room I always kept tidy, in case any of the kids need to sleep here, but was never used, I realized how many parts of my life I'd put on hold, waiting for them. There was the garden I didn't expand because what if the grandkids want to play there and there's no space? There was the trip to Europe I always dreamed of but never took because what if one of them needs me? There were the courses I wanted to take, the hobbies I wanted to explore, the life I wanted to live, all paused, all waiting, all depending on the approval and availability of 3 people who clearly weren't losing sleep over me. I sat on the guest room bed and started making a list on my phone. Not a shopping list or to-do list, but a dream list. Things I wanted to do just for myself, without considering anyone else. Learn Italian, take painting classes, travel to Italy, volunteer at an animal shelter, renovate the garden the way I want, buy that colorful couch I always wanted but thought the kids would think was tacky, cut my hair really short, start going to the gym, make new friends. The list kept growing, and with each item I added, I felt something expanding inside my chest. They were possibilities, they were opportunities. It was my life finally being about me again. The phone rang again. It was Robert this time. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called 3 more times in a row and I ignored them all. Finally, he sent a voice message. Mom, what's going on? Sarah said you hung up on her, that you're acting strange. We're just worried about you. Call us, please. We need to talk. Need to talk. How funny, right? Yesterday they didn't even need to show up. But today they need to talk because I'm not behaving the way they expect. I didn't respond. For the first time in decades, I simply didn't respond. And the silence was liberating. I spent the entire morning organizing things. I separated clothes I didn't wear anymore to donate. I took photos off the wall, those family photos where everyone smiled, but that now seemed like lies to me, staged. I didn't throw them away, just stored them in a box in the closet. I didn't need to see that every day, reminding me of a family unity that didn't exist anymore, if it ever truly existed. I called a flower shop and ordered new seedlings for the garden. Those vibrant, colorful flowers I always thought were beautiful, but never planted because I thought it was too much. Now it wasn't anymore. Now it was exactly what I wanted. In the afternoon, I put the gifts in the car and drove to the shelter. When I got there and saw the children, their eyes shining when they saw the wrapped packages, I felt my heart squeeze, but in a good way. A little girl about 6 years old grabbed Sarah's shawl, the one I'd made with so much care, stitch by stitch, and wrapped herself in it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "It's warm," she said, smiling with such pure joy that it made my eyes fill with tears. There was the purpose of that shawl, not in my daughter's hands, who would probably thank out of politeness and then store it in the closet, but in the hands of this child who really needed it, who really appreciated it. I returned home feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. It wasn't explosive happiness. It wasn't euphoria. It was something deeper. It was peace. It was the peace of knowing I'd made a decision for myself, that I'd chosen my dignity above the desperate need to be loved by people who clearly didn't know how to love me anymore. The phone kept ringing the whole way back. Robert, Sarah, Tom, all wanting to talk, but I wasn't ready to talk. I was busy discovering who I was when I wasn't defined by the role of mother available 24/7. And that discovery, as scary as it was also incredibly exciting. Because for the first time in a long time, my life was about to be about Helen, not about Helen's children. 3 days passed since Christmas, and I'd managed to maintain my peace by ignoring my children's insistent calls. But on the 4th day, on a Thursday afternoon, I heard cars stopping in front of the house. I looked through the window and felt my stomach turn. It was all 3 of them. Robert, Sarah, and Tom had gotten together and shown up unannounced, as if they'd planned an intervention. I saw them getting out of the cars with those serious, determined expressions, and I immediately knew the conversation I'd been avoiding was about to happen. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and went to the door before they rang the bell. When I opened it, all 3 were a bit disconcerted, as if they didn't expect me to be waiting for them. "Hi, Mom," Robert said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "We came to talk. Is it okay if we come in?" There was something in the way he asked, as if he were asking permission, but at the same time already assuming the answer would be yes. That deeply irritated me. "Depends on what you came to talk about," I answered, without moving from the door, without opening space for them to pass. Sarah exchanged a worried look with Tom. "Mom, we're worried about you. You're not acting normal. You don't answer our calls. You disappeared on Christmas night. You donated the gifts we were going to get. What's going on?" Ah, so they already knew about the gifts. Someone must have seen or commented. I opened the door completely and let them in, but I didn't offer coffee, didn't suggest they sit down, didn't make any of those automatic maternal gestures I always made. I just stood in the living room, arms crossed, waiting. They settled on the couch, all 3 together, united against me as if I were the problem to be solved. Tom, my youngest, always the most emotional, tried first. "Mom, we're really sorry for not coming on Christmas, but you have to understand we had commitments, responsibilities." And that's when something inside me burst. Not explosively, not with screams or hysteria, but it burst like a dam that finally gives way, releasing years of accumulated frustration. "Commitments," I repeated, and my voice was strangely calm. "Responsibilities. You're right. You had commitments. Expensive restaurants, in-laws' houses, luxury resorts. Those were your commitments. And me, what am I? An obligation that can be cancelled with a cold message." Robert tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. "No, Robert. You came here wanting to talk, so now you're going to listen to me. You left me alone on Christmas. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Each of you consciously chose that I wasn't worth 1 day of your time." The words came out like sharp knives, cutting through the tense silence of the room. Sarah tried to justify herself, that defensive way of hers appearing immediately. "Mom, it wasn't like that. We thought you'd understand, that you always understand." And there was the whole problem, distilled in one sentence. "Exactly, Sarah. I always understand. I always overlooked, always forgave, always put you first. And you got so used to it that you think you have a right, that you can treat me as a second option, as plan B, as that mother who'll always be there no matter how badly you treat me." I saw her face turn red, tears starting to form, but I wasn't going to stop now. I kept this inside me for too long. "Do you know what I did on Christmas?" I continued, my voice still controlled but loaded with emotion. "I spent the entire day cooking. I set the most beautiful table I've ever set. I wrapped gifts thinking about each of you. And I waited. I waited like an idiot, watching the clock pass, watching the food get cold, watching the candles melt. And when I finally accepted you weren't coming, that you'd forgotten me on purpose. I cried. I cried alone at that empty table, feeling like the most disposable thing in the world. My voice faltered a bit at the end, but I didn't stop. And you know what hurt most? It wasn't even you not coming. It was discovering through your messages the next day that you didn't even feel bad about it. Tom had watery eyes now. Mom, we're so sorry. We didn't realize it was that important. And that phrase, that damn phrase, made me even more furious. Didn't realize it was important. Christmas, Tom. The day I always made a point of bringing the family together. How did you not realize it was important? I looked at all three, seeing discomfort, guilt, embarrassment on their faces. But you know what? I'm grateful. Grateful you left me alone because it was exactly what I needed to open my eyes. Robert frowned, confused. What do you mean? You left me alone, and I discovered I don't need you to be happy, I said. And for the first time since they arrived, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of liberation. A neighbor, who barely knows me, invited me to spend Christmas with his family. People I'd never seen before treated me with more affection, more respect, more consideration than my own children. And that's when I realized I spent years putting you at the center of my life, but you took me out of the center of your lives a long time ago. And that's okay. You're adults. You have your families, your lives. But I also have a right to have mine. The silence that followed was so dense it was almost tangible. Sarah tried one more time, her voice trembling. Mom, we didn't want to hurt you. We just... But I interrupted. Just what, Sarah? Just didn't think. Just thought I'd understand like I always understand. You didn't want to hurt me, but you did. And you know what's the difference between intention and action. Action is what matters. You might not have wanted to, but you did. And now you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Robert stood up, that authoritarian way of his appearing. Consequences? What consequences? I looked at him, my oldest son, who I raised alone after his father died, and felt a mixture of love and disappointment that almost broke me in half. The consequence is you can't count on me like you always have. I'm not going to live in the shadow of your ingratitude anymore. I'm not going to wait for visits that never come, for calls that never happen, for a love you clearly can't give anymore. I saw the shock on all three faces, as if they were finally understanding this was serious, that it wasn't a tantrum, wasn't a phase, it was a real change. Tom stood up too, tears openly falling now. Mom, you can't do this. You're our mother. And that phrase, that invocation of the role I'd always performed with so much dedication, was the last straw. Exactly, Tom. I am your mother. I always have been. But you? Are you being my children? Because children show up. Children call. Children care. And you stopped doing all of that a long time ago. The truth of those words echoed through the room like thunder, leaving all of us in absolute silence, facing the abyss that opened between us that Thursday afternoon. After I let all that out, the silence that took over the room was deafening. Robert, Sarah, and Tom stood there paralyzed, as if they'd taken a punch to the stomach and were still trying to catch their breath. It was the first time, maybe in their entire lives, that I'd truly set boundaries, that I'd said no definitively, that I'd chosen my dignity over their need to keep me available and convenient. I saw Sarah wiping tears with the back of her hand, Tom looking at the floor as if searching for words that didn't exist, and Robert. Robert had that expression I knew well, that mixture of anger and shame of someone caught doing something wrong but doesn't want to admit it. It was Robert who broke the silence first, but not the way I expected. Fine, Mom. If that's what you want, for us to disappear from your life, then okay. He stood up with that air of indignation, as if I was the one being unfair, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. Let's go, guys. She clearly doesn't want us here. Sarah looked at him confused, torn between following her brother or staying to try to fix things. Tom remained standing, hands in his pockets, face red with contained emotion. Robert, wait! Sarah started, but he was already heading toward the door. And there was the son I raised. When confronted with his failures, he ran instead of facing them. Robert, I called, and my voice was firm. He stopped, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. I didn't say I want you to disappear from my life. I said I'm not going to live waiting for crumbs of attention you decide to give me when it's convenient. There's a huge difference. If you can't understand the difference, then the problem is bigger than I imagined. He stood there for a few seconds that felt eternal and then left, slamming the door hard enough to make the picture on the wall shake. Sarah jumped at the sound, eyes wide, torn between running after her brother or staying with me. Tom was the first to really speak, and when he spoke, his voice was broken, vulnerable, completely different from the confident young man who'd entered my house half an hour ago. "Mom, I didn't know you felt this way. I swear I didn't know." He finally looked me in the eyes, and I saw there's something I hadn't seen in a long time. My real son, not the busy adult version of him, but the boy who used to come running to me when he was scared or sad. I was a terrible son. I know that now, and I have no excuse. Jessica always said I should visit you more, call you more, but I always thought you were fine, that you were strong, that you didn't need. His voice failed, and he needed to stop to take a deep breath. "I do need, Tom," I said, and I felt my own tears threatening to fall. "I always needed, but you were so busy, so involved in your own lives, that you stopped noticing. And I, fool that I am, kept pretending everything was fine because I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to be that needy mother kids avoid because she only complains." Tom took a step forward, hesitant, as if wanting to hug me, but not sure if he had permission. "You were never a burden, Mom. Never. I was the idiot who didn't know how to value what I had." And when he finally hugged me, tight, desperate, I felt something break inside me in a good way. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It wasn't everything magically resolved, but it was a beginning. Sarah was still there, standing in the middle of the room, crying silently. When Tom let me go, she came to me, hands trembling. "Mom, I don't know what to say. You're right about everything. I left you alone, and it wasn't just on Christmas. It was for the past few years. I got so busy trying to please Mark, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, that I forgot to be a daughter. And when I think about how I treated you," her voice broke completely, and she collapsed in sobs. I hugged her too, but it was different from the automatic hug of always. It was conscious, it had weight, it had meaning. "Sarah, I love you. I always have. But love isn't enough when it doesn't come with respect and consideration." "I know," she whispered against my shoulder, "and I'm going to do better. I promise I'm going to do better. Not because you confronted me, not because you're angry, but because I finally understood how much I hurt you, how much I neglected you." She pulled away, looking directly into my eyes with that intensity she always had when she was a child and wanted to convince me of something. "Give me a chance to prove I can be the daughter you deserve. Please." I didn't answer immediately. I stood there looking at her, at Tom, at the empty space where Robert had been, and realized something important. Real change takes time. Beautiful words in the heat of emotion are easy. The hard part is keeping those promises when life goes back to normal, when routines resume, when excuses become convenient again. "You two can have a chance," I finally said, choosing words carefully. "But it has to be different. I don't want visits out of obligation. I don't want rushed calls because you remembered it's been a while since you talked to me. I want true presence, or I'd rather have nothing. Understood?" Both nodded, Tom with more conviction, Sarah still processing the weight of what I was asking. And as for Robert, I started, but Tom interrupted me. "Let me talk to him, Mom. He's angry now, but it's because he knows you're right, and he doesn't like being wrong. He's always been like that, but he'll come back. I know he will. And when he does, it'll be different." I wasn't as sure as Tom, but I nodded anyway. Sarah asked if she could visit me on the weekend for real, not just passing by, but spending the afternoon with me. Tom said he'd call me every day, even if just to know how my day was. Beautiful promises. But I'd heard beautiful promises before, and they always dissolved in life's rush. This time, I'd believe it when I saw actions, not words. When they left, slower than they entered, more thoughtful, carrying the weight of what had been said, I closed the door and leaned against it exhausted. That confrontation had been necessary, even liberating, but it had also been draining. I looked at the living room, still feeling the tension that had filled that space minutes ago, and realized something. I had recovered my voice. After years being the mother who always understood, always forgave, always adapted, I had finally said no. I'd set boundaries. I'd demanded respect. And most surprising, I wasn't feeling guilty. I was feeling strong, in control of my own life, for the first time in decades. I didn't know if my children would really change, if Robert would come back with a genuine apology, if Sarah and Tom would keep their promises. But I knew one thing. I had changed. And that change, regardless of what they did, was permanent. I was no longer that Helen who settled for crumbs. I was the Helen who knew her worth. And that nobody could take away from me. 1 year. A whole year passed since that devastating Christmas that changed everything. And now, as I set the Christmas table again, I look around and barely recognize my life. The table is beautiful, yes, but it's different from last year's. It's not that anxious perfection of someone trying to impress or prove something. It's a cheerful, authentic table. With colorful flowers, I planted myself in the renovated garden. With mixed dishes, because I discovered I don't need everything matching perfectly. There's turkey, of course. Some traditions are too good to abandon. But there are also dishes other people brought, contributions from a family I built in ways I never imagined. Michael arrives early, just like he promised, bringing that gentle smile that's become so familiar over the past year. He's become so much more than a neighbor. He's turned into my best friend, my morning walk partner, the person I share coffee and deep conversations about life with. "Helen, you look radiant," he says. And I know it's not just being polite. I really am different. I cut my hair short like I always wanted. I'm in better shape after a year of going to that seniors gym, and there's a light in my eyes that had been gone for way too long. "Thank you for saving me that Christmas, Michael," I say, like I've said 1,000 times before. You saved so much more than just a lonely night. You showed me that I still had value. David, Rachel, and the grandkids arrive right after, and Emma and Lucas come running to hug me like they do every time they see me. "Grandma Helen! Grandma Helen!" they shout, and my heart fills up every single time they call me that. I'm officially their extra grandma now, present at birthdays, school presentations, Sunday dinners. Rachel hugs me tight. "The house looks beautiful, Helen, and so do you." She's become like a daughter to me, in a way. The daughter I chose, not the one I got through genetics. We talk almost every day, share recipes, vent about life, laugh at silly things. It's the kind of relationship I always wanted to have with Sarah, but never could. The doorbell rings, and it's Margaret, the lady I met at the shelter where I started volunteering. She brings her granddaughter, a shy 12-year-old girl named Sophie, who lost her parents in an accident and is being raised by her grandmother. "Helen, thank you for the invitation," Margaret says, her eyes shining. "We became friends at the support group for elderly people who dealt with family abandonment, and we discovered we had way more in common than we imagined." Sophie's carrying a plate of cookies they made together, and I see her looking around with that mix of shyness and curiosity. "Sophie, sweetie, the other kids are out in the yard. Want to go play with them?" Emma's already pulling her by the hand before she even answers. The folks from the community center arrive too. "Helen, yes, another Helen, what a wonderful coincidence. Frank, Dorothy, people who've become my new family, my chosen tribe. Each one brings a dish, a story, a genuine joy to be there. The house starts filling up with voices, laughter, that good kind of noise from people who really want to be together. I look around and feel gratitude burning in my chest. This table, these people, this life, I built this. After spending decades building my children's lives, I finally built my own. And it's more beautiful than I could have imagined on that horrible night a year ago. The doorbell rings again, and when I go to answer, my heart does that little jump it still does even after a year. It's Sarah, Tom, and their families. Robert isn't with them. He's still in the process, still struggling with pride. But Sarah told me he finally started therapy. He's dealing with his own issues, trying to understand why he was so harsh, so distant. One day he'll show up, maybe, or not. And I've made peace with both possibilities. "Hi, Mom," Sarah says, and there's something different about her too. She comes to visit me every Monday now, without fail. We have tea, really talk, rebuild our relationship brick by brick. Tom hugs me tight, and he's kept his promise. He calls every day, sometimes just to tell me something silly, sometimes to ask for advice, but always present. Jessica, who I thought was part of the problem, surprisingly became an ally. She confessed months ago that she always tried to get Tom to visit me more, but he was stubborn. Now she invites me to lunch herself, includes me in their outings. Their grandkids, Lily and Max, ran off to play with the other children, and the house got even noisier. Sarah looks around, seeing all these people, and whispers, "Mom, so many people. You did all this?" I smile. I did. I discovered that family is so much more than blood, Sarah. It's about who chooses to be present. When we finally sit down for dinner, the table is completely different from last year. It's not just my children I desperately waited for. It's a mosaic of people, each with their own story, each having chosen to be there. Michael makes a toast. To Helen, who taught us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to value yourself, never too late to build the life we deserve. Everyone raises their glasses, and I see Sarah and Tom with tears in their eyes, finally understanding what they lost, what they almost destroyed, but also seeing the chance they still have to be part of this new life I built. And to family, I add, raising my glass. To the family we choose, to the family that chooses us back. During dinner, Emma tells a funny story from school. Frank discusses politics with David, and I need to step in before it turns into a debate. Dorothy teaches Sophie that napkin trick, and there's laughter, there's life, there's real love filling every corner of my house. Sarah leans in and whispers, "Mom, I'm so sorry it took me so long to understand. I'm sorry for not valuing you when I should have." I squeeze her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." And it's true. The past hurt. It hurt a lot, but the present is beautiful. Tom looks at me from across the table and makes that hand signal we used to do when he was a kid. A silent, "I love you." I make the signal back, and I know we're going to be okay. When the night ends and everyone leaves, with long hugs, promises to see each other soon, kids complaining they don't want to go, I stand there at the door waving, watching cars leave, taking people I love and who love me back. Michael's the last to leave. "Merry Christmas, Helen," he says, holding my hands. "You turned that Christmas tragedy into something beautiful. You're an inspiration to all of us." When I close the door and look at the messy living room, full of dirty dishes and crooked decorations, I smile. There's work ahead to clean everything up, but tomorrow. Right now, I just want to absorb this moment, this gratitude, this deep peace. I walk to the window and look at the starry sky, thinking about everything that's changed in 1 year. They left me alone that Christmas, I murmur to myself. But fate had a surprise. It showed me that family is so much more than blood. It's about who chooses to stay, who chooses to love, who chooses to be present. And when you understand that, when you really understand that, your whole life changes. And so ends the real story of Helen, a woman who was abandoned by her own ungrateful children at Christmas, but who found the strength to rebuild her life in a way more beautiful than she ever imagined. She taught us that it's never too late to value yourself, that family goes way beyond blood ties, and that sometimes the biggest disappointments open doors to unexpected joys. Helen transformed the pain of abandonment into freedom, loneliness into true connections, and proved that we deserve to be surrounded by people who really choose us. And you, have you ever gone through something similar? Have you ever felt left aside by those who should love you unconditionally? How would you handle it if you were in Helen's place? Would you forgive your children or move forward building a new family? Share your story here in the comments, because often we discover we're not alone in these pains, and sharing can help someone who's going through the same thing right now. If this emotional story touched your heart, if you felt every emotion alongside Helen, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Because everyone deserves to feel valued, everyone deserves to be surrounded by real love, and sometimes we need these stories to remember our own worth. Until the next story, and remember, you deserve so much more than crumbs of attention.